On this week's MetPy Monday, we're going to look at a useful utility to count items and do other useful things with iterables. Welcome to another MetPy Monday. Hello, I'm John Lehman, a software engineer for Unidata. This week I want to show you a handy little utility that I found this week while doing some work with iterables. Things like lists or arrays or strings. And that is the counter object from collections. So we want to be able to do things like count how many of a certain value is in this list. Now, of course, we could do that by calling the count method on our list, and we get that we have 6 5s. What about a string, such as Unidata? If we want to know the number of A's, that works as well. So there are some handy built-in methods, but maybe I want to know how many times each thing in that list occurs. Or maybe I want to be able to add or subtract the number of things in lists. So we can do that with the counter object. So we're going to import it from collections, import counter. We're going to create an instance of the counter object. I'm going to call it counter with a lowercase c. It's an instance of counter, and it's going to take my list. Now, if I print out counter, we see that I get a dictionary back. So it's a key value pair, and we see that I have 6 5s, 2 4s, 1 9, 1 1, 2 6s, 1 2, 3 7s, and 2 3s. So the key is the value that's in my list, and the value is the number of times that that particular key appears in my iterable, which in this case is a list. That means we can index into this dictionary. For example, if I want to know how many times a 3 occurs, I get the index of 3 and it has the value of 2. So that's pretty handy, and it's done all of this calculation ahead of time. So once I create the counter object on my list, I don't have to keep calling the count method. Another handy thing is if I ask for a value that's not there, it just returns a 0. This is done with something like the .get method with a default specified of 0. Now it doesn't just work on lists. I said it works on iterables. So let's create the counter object on the string Unidata. And we see we have one of every letter except the A. There are 2. If we want to know if it's case sensitive, the easiest way is to modify our string and just test it out. It's one of the great things about notebooks. It makes this very easy. And we see that indeed capital A and lowercase a are treated differently. So I now know if I want to use this on a big block of text, I would have to call upper or lower to cast everything to one case. So that's pretty useful, but you might not be that excited about it as it's not that much different than the count method. It just does all of the unique items at once. Well, there's also a most common method, which in this case is not really too exciting. We have one of everything. But if I go back and get counter on my list, we see it gives us that 5 is the most common, occurring 6 times, and so on. So it's very similar to counter, but it's sorted. So I could get the 0th thing, and we see that it is the number 5 is the most common with 6 occurrences. So that's another handy method. The last interesting thing with counter is let's create 2 counters, one on a list that's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and one that's on a list 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We can do some interesting operations. So there's C1 and C2. I can call C1 plus C2. And we see that I've got a 5 here and a 5 here, so I have 2 of those. A 4 and a 4, I've got 2, and so on. I only have 1, 1, and 1, 6. So it combines the counts from those two things. But what about subtraction? I can call C1 minus C2. And we see that I'm left with 1 occurring 1 time. Because 2, 3, 4, 5 all cancel out. C1's on the left side of that equation, so our 1 is left. There are no 6s, and it doesn't let you go into a negative count. So we only have 1 item left. Similarly, C2 minus C1 gives us the number 6 occurring once for the same reasons, except now C2's on the left-hand side of the operator. So this is great if you've got lists that you need to know what the most common values are in them, or most common strings in a list, or most common characters in a string, or if you want to do some differences. How are these data sets different? Or if you combine them, you've got 2 lists and you want to just know how many instances of something occur in both of them put together, you can create 2 counter objects and then just add them together. Another one of the ways that the batteries included nature of Python makes you have to write fewer lines of code to accomplish relatively complex tasks. I hope that you found this useful. I'll see you on next week's MetPy Monday.